Namaskar and thank you for staying with us on DD India. You're watching DD Dialogue Special Edition 2020. In the next 1 hour, we're going to talk about the big takeaways, the year that was 2020, obviously dominated by COVID discourse, but specifically in the sectors that matter the most. The big takeaways and new normals achieved in COVID care, vaccination, foreign policy, as well as economic revival. And we're extremely honored to have a high-powered panel on this special edition of DD Dialogue. Yearender, new normal under various verticals, and COVID and vaccination is one aspect, viewers, one issue which has actually dominated this entire year of 2020. Very glad to have with us on DD Dialogue Dr. Randeep Guleria, Director AIMS, and also Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor. And these two gentlemen undoubtedly also, in fact, helmed various projects and were absolutely part of the COVID response mechanism of the country under their various domains, respective domains. I'm going to quickly start with Dr. Guleria. How do you look back when we talk about the entire COVID response mechanism? Remember, we started with almost negligible laboratory infrastructure pertaining to COVID, and now we're still firming up that infrastructure in the entire healthcare sector, the way we responded to the situation.
2020 has been a tough year for the healthcare sector. But if I look back, as far as India is concerned, I look back with a lot of hope, pride and satisfaction that in our country with limited resources, we were able to really achieve something which was not thought of at the beginning. And we were able in many ways to convert this into an opportunity. When we started in February, late January and February, when the pandemic was just starting, we had very limited facilities, whether it be testing. We had very few labs which could test, and the kits had to be imported. We were not sure how we would do COVID-19 testing. Our healthcare workers were very worried because there was this whole news item coming of shortage of PPEs. All PPEs were being imported from outside. There was no manufacturing done in our own country. There was this worry of N95 masks. We as doctors got very worried because we were hearing news of the outbreaks happening in Italy and Spain, where people are running out of ventilators. Yes. Two or three patients sharing one ventilator. So that was those frightening days where we had to see how can we ramp up our infrastructure. Much about the virus. We were concerned about things like oxygen supply. How would we provide oxygen supply? And how do we segregate these patients from those who have not got COVID? Because we were learning that those who are having comorbidities have a very poor, the outcome is much more, is worse than those who don't have comorbidities. These were the challenges that we faced. Like I was saying, that we really overcame all of them, and we became more resilient. We became more self-sufficient. We are now manufacturing PPEs and exporting them. We have N95 masks which the country is making. A lot of industries which were not into healthcare came into healthcare and started manufacturing or making ventilators. And a lot of us got together in terms of improving our infrastructure, developing strategies. And I think there was a lot of partnership with a lot of support from policymakers, from the political will was there. And therefore, now we are in a situation 10 months down where our cases have come down. We haven't had a situation where we ran out of oxygen beds, where we had to share ventilators. In our hospital, in the early days, we did a study of how could we recycle PPEs.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Shortage. Can we reuse PPEs? Can we sterilize them again, pack them again, and give it to our residents? Because we were very worried that we may not have enough PPEs. Then we are very happy to say that we never reached that situation. We had a situation, there was enough PPEs available.
Yes, Dr. Raghavan, I can see Dr. Raghavan smiling at that sense of assurance, Dr. Raghavan now. So are we dealing with an unknown here, a situation that is unknown, but we are prepared for that? Very quickly.
Absolutely. But very quickly, sometimes changes happen which increase the transmission. And the London variant is one such. The South Africa variant is one such. But the variation could have increased because of this. Laboratory studies indicate that's possible, but it's also possible that other social measures have also increased transmission. So this is preemptive caution, and this is what we have learned from: be ready, be careful, and take preemptive steps Otherwise, sometimes if we let things happen, then we are reactive. So these are preemptive cautionary steps.
Okay. Dr. Guleria, taking this to you now, the entire health sector, because we will now not only talk about the laboratory infrastructure, COVID, I think now this has gone bigger than this. We didn't know what we were dealing with, COVID-19. Now, looking at 2021, we already know part of it, what we are going to deal, the mutant bit, but then the overhauling of the health sector, the launch of digital health mission. What I'm trying to ask you, Dr. Guleria, is that do you think there has been an unprecedented overhaul in the health sector because of the COVID-19 thing striking the globe? In India, what is it that has enabled us to deal with the situation much better vis-a-vis other countries?
So yes, I do think that it is the COVID-19 has put the health sector onto the center stage. And that has made a huge difference, especially as far as the public health sector is concerned. For many years, the public health sector was not that much in focus in terms of support, in terms of infrastructure. But COVID-19 made everyone realize that we have to have a very robust and good public health system, because in the early days, it was the public health system which really rose to the challenge in managing patients who came in with COVID-19. And therefore, that has been a big takeaway from 2020. Also, it showed us that we can, if need be, modify our system so that we can take the influx of increasing number of cases. We can really train our healthcare workers, whether it comes to surveillance, whether it comes to management, or whether it comes to testing as far as new emerging infections are concerned. But I think it also has taught us a lot of lessons. And one of the lessons is the importance of preventive health, whether it be wearing a mask, whether it be hand washing, and a lot of other such things, because prevention is better than cure. And therefore, if we are able to have a lot of preventive health in the future, a lot of infectious diseases, not only COVID, but other respiratory viral infections and even diseases like tuberculosis will really come down, and we'll have a better control of them. We are able to institute a lot of measures very early on.
Okay.
And that really helped us in two ways. One is we never had a sharp rise in the number of cases as was being seen in the West. We were able to flatten the peak, and that really didn't allow us to, didn't put a strain on the healthcare system, which was not manageable. It also gave us time to prepare ourselves. We started off with very few labs. Now we have more than 2,000 labs which can do testing for COVID-19. So the whole training mechanism, getting the kits, getting everything was done in that time when we had the lockdown and when we had subsequent measures were put in place. Similarly, it allowed us to really develop a sort of an infrastructure from COVID care centers to COVID hospitals to COVID ICUs, make sure that all of them were well equipped, train our staff, and we learn more about the virus. Remember, in the early days, we didn't know even how to treat it. True. A lot of other experimental drugs were tried. So that helped us in actually developing good treatment protocols, developing good facilities, having trained manpower, and having enough diagnostic tests so that we could really contain areas where there was an outbreak. So testing, tracking, and tracing became something which was a mantra which was followed very, very aggressively, and we were able to develop very good containment zones. So I think there has been a lot of sort of coordinated work which helped in bringing down the mortality and not allowing our cases to really become unmanageable. Our mortality rate is much lower than what is being reported in Europe and in North America.
Yes, and not only that, Dr. Raghavan, when other European countries are looking at imposing stringent second wave or phase of lockdown, notwithstanding the New Year and Christmas celebrations, I wouldn't say that we in India are a little comfortably placed, but then we started with extreme strict measures. Now, when we look back at 2020, the distance covered in the vaccination domain, and what are the lessons learned?
First of all, let me get to the last point you mentioned about the distance covered in the vaccination domain. Vaccines typically take decades to make, and they cost tens of millions of dollars, maybe $100 million or so. Now we're talking about a vaccine or vaccines which have taken a year to make. And the costs of that have been in actually billions of dollars. And the reason why it's possible to make vaccines in such a short time is because of parallel processing. It's not that you skip any safety measures, but you, for example, manufacture in bulk even before the safety trials are completed. And should the safety trials fail and the vaccine is not on, then you lose all that bulk. So these are the kinds of excessive efforts in parallel processing which have been taken place. So no stage has been skipped, no safety norms have been relaxed, yet speed has done. Now, there is a lesson going forward in this. Can we learn from this and be prepared for other pandemics? Pandemics don't come from completely unknown diseases or viral vectors or bacterial vectors. We have a good list of very likely candidates. Can we go ahead, collaborate globally and nationally so that we are prepared for every kind of potential major pandemic? We know ones which are more likely, so that these steps are narrowed down should something else happen with greater speed, with less stress. That is feasible, and that's an important lesson we have learned.
In the capacity of principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister, sir, what's the sense that you're getting? In the sense, the world is looking at India as a pharmaceutical capital, and we've done very good in terms of supplying, in terms of supplying. The important medicines required, FCQ, etc. But 2021 is going to be a very, very critical year. In 2020, the way we've engaged with the rest of the world when it comes to these pharmaceuticals, and now the roadmap for 2021.
Well, what we have done in this previous year has been, this year, 2020, has been astounding. We are, of course, a major exporter of vaccines and of generic drugs. And we must remember that primarily we are manufacturers and were not, till this year, also innovators. This year, something astounding has happened. Our scientists, our engineers, our industry have come together and have also started developing new drugs and vaccines and trying to, which is a major plus. Now, going forward, there is a sense of learning which we must have and introspection. Over decades, at the interest of buying cheap raw material, what has happened is that we have outsourced many capabilities which we have and had to external manufacturers so that we import cheap raw materials and assemble products. This is a great danger which the pandemic has highlighted, where global supply chains with strong nodes outside, when they get disrupted, we are in a serious situation. PPEs was one example. Active pharmaceutical ingredients for drugs is another. The capability to make, testing reagents is third. These are all completely within our capabilities. Now this year we have renewed our commitment because we have done all these things again independently. We have renewed our commitment to never let this happen again. We must, of course, be an open global economy, but we must also have internal strong nodes when we're part of supply chains, so we're never held in a crisis like happened early on this year.
Dr. Guleria, your thoughts taking this ahead, the same question to you, especially when we talk about the hospitals, the core, the grassroots health infrastructure. What's the blueprint for 2021 and the lessons learned from 2020?
I think, as has already been said, the lessons learned from 2020 has been that we have to be self-reliant. We have to be able to have our capacity. And one of the areas that we have really not worked aggressively is manufacturing medical equipments. A majority of our medical equipments are imported, whether it be monitors, whether it be ventilators, whether it be a CT scan, whether it be an MRI. And
so this Atmanirbharta in medical equipment is, we have to travel a very long distance there.
We have to start that path because for long we have taken, so as has been mentioned, our strength was in generic products. Our strength was in vaccine production. But the R&D for vaccine, from being able to innovate and make new vaccine, is something that we've now started doing. And we need to carry that forward. We have started making ventilators, but I think we need to now look at how can we be Atmanirbhar in making medical equipment. And we should really be able to say that we will become, let's say, the hub of medical equipment, diagnostics, and R&D in the next coming few years. So that like we export generic drugs, we should be exporting a lot of these stuff from our own country. And that is, I think, what we've learned in 2020, that you have to be self-reliant, you have to be independent. We don't want a situation that we faced, that we had to start depending upon requesting other countries to really help us in getting medical equipment. We should now have our own, let's say, hub in making all of this. This is something that I think we've really learned in 2020.
Just to wrap it up, gentlemen, I'm going to ask both of you because Dr. Guleria and Dr. Raghavan, you're also amongst those Indians at the helm of affairs in their respective domains. You've been pretty much part of the nation's fight back to beat pandemic 19 in your respective domains. To the viewers of national broadcaster Doordarshan, what is your message going to be? Dr. Raghavan first.
Well, the message is, both of assurance that the end is in sight and a level of caution and introspection needed, because we need to make sure that we are still disciplined, still cautious, so that we can get out of this pandemic.
Dr. Guleria.
So I'd like to say, firstly, we should be all proud of what we've done, as we should be proud Indians that we've really achieved something which we never thought we could in 2020. And we are now in a very good position if we start looking at the number of cases and our case fatality. But as we go forward into 2021, we have to continue to maintain on this and sustain this. It's so COVID appropriate behavior, getting the vaccine and getting everyone vaccinated, and coming back to normal, and not forgetting the lessons that we've learned from 2020 is the way forward in my mind.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randeep Guleria and also Dr. Vijay Raghavan. Both of you, very honored to have you with us on this edition of DD Dialogue, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. And viewers, you don't go away. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the new normal. We talked about COVID-19 response, we talked about vaccine, and on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the big foreign policy takeaway, and most importantly, Atmanirbharta in economic sector on the other side. Another power panel waiting for us. Stay with us.
A quick look at the day's top news. 100 big stories from across the country and the world in just 30 minutes. Watch Express News Monday to Friday, 7 p.m. only on DD India.
Welcome back and thank you very much for staying with us on DD Dialogue. And we have a very, very special guest to talk about the economical outlook for 2021 and most importantly, how 2020 has been. And very glad to have on the show Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Thank you so much. Very importantly, 2020 has been unprecedented, and you've had various earlier appearances also on the national network and also on DD Dialogue. Well, now at the fag end of 2020, how do you look back? Would you say that a lot of distance, in fact, has been covered in this year in terms of achieving the rebound in economy? Or would you say that this work is still under progress? You're not a satisfied man today, or you're a satisfied man today?
I would say that overall, Sakal, India's response was a very humane one, recognizing that that while GDP growth will come back after a lockdown, and it indeed is coming back, human lives, once they are lost, cannot be brought back. That was the essential principle that guided India's response. Also, we took into account the fact that this is a year of extreme uncertainty, and therefore, responded in a calibrated manner, especially focusing on giving impetus once the unlock phase was initiated. As if you think about it, to give a parallel, it did not make sense to actually push on the accelerator when the brake was on. But once the brake was taken off, that's when the accelerator was pressed on. And that is why, in fact, if you see Atmanirbhar Stimulus 3, which has focused on job creation and has actually also expanded fiscally the entire fiscal package was about 1 to 1.25%. So I think overall, if you look at, I'm satisfied with how we've responded, especially by not just focusing on being myopic, but instead actually focusing on long run. I think in that sense, we've actually been able to save both lives and livelihoods in a large measure. At the same time, on the economy as well, the recovery in manufacturing has been very good. So we have to continue and build on these, steps that we've taken into the next year, especially on generating, more demand, focused on demand and job creation as well. I think this is where some of the measures that have been taken in the Atmanirbhar Stimulus 3 package, I think would go a long way.
Job creation you mentioned, but job creation was one of the sectors badly dented. People lost their jobs. And in fact, if you remember, we talked about it in the earlier editions of DD Dialogue also. Well, that was many months ago. Now we're looking at end of 2020. There were a lot of assurances coming from the government, but then anything that you want to tell to the viewers of Doordarshan? Assurances, does the future look now optimistic?
No, I think the coming year growth should be very good. We are expecting growth, to be robust in the coming year. If you look at the demand, especially on the manufacturing side, and even in services, except for a couple of sectors that are affected by social distancing, the rest of the sectors have responded well. And once some of these sectors also demand comes back, then jobs should definitely be, the scenario should be better. And this has been encouraged by the emphasis on job creation, by taking care of the provident fund of the of small firms. The government has basically given a subsidy to encourage job creation. I think these will definitely help in that process. Overall, though, I think the improvement in demand conditions will go a long way in bringing back some of the vitality in this area.
Also, the way the ministry responded very, very swiftly when you announced those packages, particularly I want to talk about the food grains should reach the poor. That was very important. We're looking at the migrant workforce crisis, and also small businesses should get the access to capital for revival. We talked about lockdown. It created huge problems. But then once the lockdown, they were lifted, those challenges were turned into opportunities. Dr. Subramaniam?
Yes, I think if you look at the way in which the stimulus measures were taken, initially the focus was on ensuring that necessities are taken care of, and that is where the food was given through the PDS. And in fact, in this context, we should acknowledge how India, because of the significant digitization of the economy, did what a country like the United States did in 5 steps, which is printing out checks, mailing them, people going and depositing it in the ATMs, withdrawing cash, and then going and spending. In contrast, India did it through the click of a button by giving cash transfers. So
the lessons learned, if I have to put it simply, Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, you've been at the helm of affairs when we talk about the whole reconstruction of economy. Lessons learned, because we were dealing with an unprecedented situation in all sectors.
Yes. No, I think, there are 2 important lessons that I would say, for us, not only in terms of going forward, but in the way, we've responded to the crises. One, faced with an unprecedented event like this, I think what is extremely critical is for policymakers to have enormous, humility, and, recognize that you can actually, you read a lot about, for instance, we read a lot about the Spanish flu, pandemic, already 100 years back, to know how it panned out. For instance, one of the learnings there was that Spanish flu episode lasted for 2 years. So we were prepared, therefore, saying that this is likely to be a long haul. It ain't going to be just a few months. And therefore, it was important to actually prepare for the long haul. Second, it was also important when faced with very, very uncertain times. risk management, paradigm of risk management is something that is really very, very useful to try and minimize the damage as much as possible. I think that's the second lesson, for facing crises like these.
What do you think has been advantage India in this? Because you're saying that, the sense that one is getting is that you're saying that, no, we're not really satisfied, but we've covered a reasonable amount of distance. Right. We could have done better, but then we did not leave any stone unturned in terms of putting things together. So in that sense, you're saying that worse could have happened. We are now leaving the worst behind us. Dr. Subramaniam, what was India advantage in that sense?
I think, for one, I would actually credit the Honorable Prime Minister for, having a long run vision, being, not just focusing on the here and now, which was done, of course, but also having the long run vision, saying this is something that we have to actually take decisions that are eventually, will be in the interest of the country at large. And secondly, also looking at the crisis as an opportunity. India is the only country that has actually launched a series of reforms during this pandemic, and actually focusing on ensuring that productivity in the economy is enhanced, that the crisis does not have any long-term impact on our growth prospects. I think that is, again, an illustration of trying to convert a crisis into an opportunity. I think these two fundamental aspects, I think behavioral aspects, have helped India in, and I would especially credit us being, focusing on the humane aspect, saying eventually it has to be about lives. And, once lives are saved, livelihoods will also come back. Yes, there will be short-term pain, but we don't want to create long-term pain. I think that, that credo has something
that's a key word. The short-term pain, please bear with that so that there is no long-term pain. Yeah. So are we trying to, if I have to be devil's advocate, Dr. Subramaniam, that the short-term pain, that phase is over, we've left it behind, and long-term gains is what 2021 is going to be all about. I know a lot of spade work is done for the budget, union budget, but what's the outlook now? How optimistic can we be about the outlook now?
So I would say that, the next couple of quarters itself in this year, growth should be better, and going forward with the emphasis on infrastructure, with the emphasis on especially on the manufacturing sector, agriculture sector, which actually contribute significant number of jobs in the economy. The prognosis is one where I think there should be good demand creation, and thereby also improvements in productivity, investment rates going up significantly. And as a result, I think the conditions for growth for reasonable periods of time would get created. So I actually am quite optimistic about the next year.
And finally, your message to the viewers of Doordarshan. The worst is over in the economic sector and good days ahead?
Yes, but I would still say let's be cautiously
with a word of caution.
Cautiously optimistic. The pandemic isn't over. I think vaccination, large sections of us actually should get vaccinated in the coming year.
See, and the last mile delivery, Dr. Subramaniam, the last mile delivery and job. No one should now lose the job.
I think that is important actually, and the government has planned well for the last mile delivery, on the vaccines. India generally, if you look at large scale events like this, whether it's an election, or the Kumbh Mela, etc., India does generally a very good job of things like these large scale. It's just because we all come together to accomplish such big events. So I think the vaccination is something. There's a lot of preparation that is already happening. So I think the last mile, delivery of that would be good. And given the robust recovery that I expect in the coming year, I think the worst is behind us. But I still, would at the level of every individual and family, I would strongly recommend and humbly request people to continue following all the norms till we all get inoculated and can resume our normal lives. So overall, cautiously optimistic.
So Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, your final word on DD Dialogue of 2020 is be optimistic, but be very, very cautious. The worst is over. 2021 will obviously look much better. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on this very special edition of DD Dialogue. Thank you.
And let me wish everyone a very, very happy new year, which it brings good health and happiness to everyone.
Thank you so much. And on that note, viewers, don't touch that remote, don't go away. On the other side, we're going to talk about big takeaways when we talk about foreign policy and how Prime Minister Narendra Modi aggressively engaged with the rest of the world in India's fight against pandemic, and also not only that, spearheaded the world's fight to beat pandemic. On the other side, foreign policy is what we're going to be talking about with the other power-packed panel. Don't go away. And thank you again. Stay with us.
As the day unfolds and news and events take shape, we get you complete coverage of every news breaking in, tracking new developments as they happen. Midday Prime English, Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. on DD News and DD India.
Thank you so much, viewers, for staying with us on DD Dialogue 2020, New Normal Big Takeaways edition. Very, very special edition, because we also have on the panel on this edition former CEA and eminent economist of the country, Arvind Virmani ji. Thank you very much for joining us. Very quickly, so much has been talked about the kind of packages that have been released in this year to deal with the battered economy. But when you look back, what has been your assessment? Has this really worked on ground?
There were three elements which our research at EGROW Foundation had identified. There was survival, revival, and re-acceleration of growth. So I think, so the first two, the critical elements were monetary and fiscal policy. I think on both those fronts, the central bank, RBI, and the government have done an excellent job. Okay. Now, we have to remember the context. The context was the huge uncertainty. It's the biggest shock in a century, I would say, 100 years approximately. And there was a lack of knowledge all over the world. And many eminent economists, many eminent people across the world were saying, do what we are doing, okay? Even though they also didn't know exactly what to do.
Yes.
So we ignored them. I think our indigenous, our research had shown, and fortunately government was either thinking the same way or was also listening to some of us. And I think we did exactly the right thing. I think we had pointed out that this mass scale injection of money by the governments, which other countries were doing and we were being urged to do, is not the right way to go. So in summary, on this survival and revival, I think it was very focused, providing guarantees, giving delays in tax payment and other compliances, etc. So I think it was an excellent, in my view, it's going to be a case study, how a poor country, we don't have lots of money to just waste on everything. So both the survival, which involved guarantees, that was a thing which, my research 20 years ago had shown, or 30 years ago, is the right thing to do, which government presumably thought of it itself. So excellent. And of course, in revival, other packages which you are mentioning.
I wanted to ask you this, sorry I'm interrupting. As a former CEA, you think these measures in 2020 COVID-dominated year, these measures have been extremely unprecedented, notwithstanding whatever government has been at the center. But the way the situation was dealt with, we came up with Atmanirbhar Bharat packages, etc., Garib Kalyan packages, etc.
Right. So on the revival part, just let me finish that and I'll come to specifically your question. And then the re-acceleration of growth, where we have, which government has really surprised. Of course, again, people like me have been talking about it, and the government, if you'll recall, even before the pandemic in September, did this amazing corporate tax reform. But despite that, what has surprised is the number of other reform measures which have been taken during the pandemic. We used to have this expression that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. What has really surprised is, bordering on Big Bang reform, that the government has not wasted this period where everybody was locked in, etc. And so overall, like I said, I'm very, very happy, very pleasantly surprised the government has done this. Now, in terms of the precise thing connected with human actions, clearly we didn't, there were conflicting advice given to the government. That one advice was that concentrated places, there is, the pandemic will spread faster, right? So if you are living in slums, etc., that's a bad thing. On the other hand, some medical people were saying, well, if people go back to the rural areas, there's no health system and they'll all die. I'm putting it in a bit stark words. So there were some decisions which were difficult, and there was no perfect decision sitting back. In hindsight, we are all very wise, but I know, because I followed day by day and month by month, that it was hard to decide. If somebody has asked me, I wouldn't be sure at that time. So, but given that, yes, the free food announced for people who clearly there was a lot of suffering. Many people suffered, including one's own family. People have died, etc. But I would say, by and large, even the survival packages, so to say, the government did what was practical and feasible. Again, there's always room for improvement, and we can think about it, but we are really discussing the past.
Yes.
So here I would say it is not, I wouldn't give it an A+ for this part of it, but definitely A-, much better than B+, certainly an A on that.
And that question, your response to that question of this being the most unprecedented economic response to deal with the situation. I'm talking about the way the situation was dealt with, whether this was release of these Atmanirbhar Bharat, multiple packages, digital India, digital economy, Garib Kalyan Yojana, etc.
Right. So one of the things which we had recommended was, because there is so much uncertainty, we have to, again, there is that old Chinese expression, cross the river by feeling the stones. And this was part of our recommendation, because we recognized very early that the whole thing was so uncertain that you cannot go on past prejudices. So you would have to feel the thing. And that's exactly what government did. It saw what problems were actually occurring, devised packages for that, and then waited for other things to become clear, and did more and more as they went along. Again, I am not saying it was perfect, but I don't know of any country in the world who had a perfect response, and we certainly did a good job.
Okay. And Mr. Padmani, one final question, sir. What are the lessons learned, if I may have asked you, from 2020 on economic front?
That brings me back to this re-accelerating growth. Last year, the growth was down to about 4.2%. And this year it's expected, people were saying worse than -10%. I have always been saying between, around -5 to -7.5. But nevertheless, that's a really serious business. So the critical thing, as again, the finance minister in her statements have recognized, that the key thing will be how to re-accelerate and return to growth. That will be the key from now on. We talked about survival, helping the poor, etc. But the key problem now is going to be how to reignite the economy, including employment generation, etc. That's one aspect. The second one, of course, is a review of our public health system. We think of health in terms of personal. We are all very, selfish in that sense. I have a heart problem. You think about those things. But public health is a different thing. It has to do with pandemics. It has to do with diseases which go through the air, through the water. So I think much more focus will have to be given on that. Sewage, sanitation, it may not have been a factor in this pandemic, but next pandemic may be all through the sewage and dirt and garbage.
You never know, yes.
Yeah, so you have to focus now on the public health system, including the R&D for these communicable diseases, etc. So I would say these are the two main lessons for the future which we have learned and which need to be dealt with.
And very quickly, your as an economist, your outlook for 2021, what would that be?
So given all the policy reforms which have been initiated, and hopefully some more in the budget, I mean, the finance minister has again raised expectation that this will be a lot of reforms for growth. If that comes through, I expect growth to be in double digits next year. Of course, plus minus, there is a lot of uncertainty in these times. But more importantly, for the next decade, we can have a sustained growth of between 7 and 8% if all these reforms, are properly implemented and fully, and they come through.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Arvind Virmani, former CA and Chief Economist, for joining us. And on that very, very optimistic assessment that 2021 is going to be a better shade.
Double digit.
Double digit and a better shade than 2020 vis-a-vis COVID containment and COVID battered economy. Thank you, sir, for joining us on DD Dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And now we take a short break. On the other side, DD Dialogue, Big Takeaways 2020 and New Normal continue. Viewers, don't go away. Stay with us.
और इस गीत के बाद
All India Radio.
बहुत रोमांटिक रही है।
Ahead of the trade negotiations that are slated
दिवस के साथ
it have undergone 9 revisions. Kohli with 903 rating points is 34 points behind Smith 900.
All India Radio. The news read by Anuja Kumar. Namaskar.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Doordarshan. Now we're talking about the new normal in 2020 on this special edition of DD Dialogue, and yet another power-packed panel. Top-notch former ambassadors, diplomats joining us on the show to talk about the big takeaways when we talk about the foreign policy domain and bigger takeaways. And thank you very much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and extremely thankful to you, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, for joining us on this one. And I'm going to quickly start with Ambassador Mohan Kumar. The way India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, aggressively engaged with the rest of the world. I'm not going to touch upon the multilateral and bilateral summits virtually, but first on the COVID front. I think we were, if I'm not mistaken, sir, one of the first few countries to go in virtual mode, reach out to the rest of the world and tell them, we are here, you can bank upon us when it comes to pharmaceuticals, but at the same time, let's fight it out together.
I think the COVID did two things to the international or the geostrategic landscape. One, there was a decline in multilateralism and an increased fragmentation of the world. So in a situation like this, and for the Modi government to have done what it has done, I would say is remarkable. Because the situation was quite negative in terms of, there was no global cooperation, each country to itself. So at a time like this, one could safely say that we have managed to engage with all the major powers of the region. We've managed to announce ourselves as the pharmacy of the world, things which other countries like China weren't able to do. And we've also ended the year, and I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but we're also ending the year with the physical meetings. So we have quietly and seamlessly gone from virtual to physical. The External Affairs Minister has started having physical meetings with some of his counterparts. So it's quite remarkable, the diplomatic journey of the Modi government for the year 2020.
And also, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, your thoughts on it. What, according to you, has been the biggest takeaway in the foreign policy? We certainly didn't slow down. We were, I think, would you say that in the most aggressive mode in terms of reaching out to the rest of the countries?
Oh, absolutely. It shows two things clearly to me. One, India's ability to manage a crisis and a crisis of proportions which is exponential. Secondly, India's ability to innovate. Now, when you talk of the number of summits that took place, virtual summits, starting off from Prime Minister's initiative to have a SAARC virtual summit, and
Yes.
reaching out to the neighbors to say, here is India, whatever we have, our facilities are at your disposal. India's initiative to have to encourage the convening of a virtual G20 summit, and a number of other summits which are a part of the record already. Now, when you talk of the biggest gains of 2020, I would clearly say this was the year of India-US relations.
Yes, it started with that. Yes.
It was in every way, and it has put India-US relations on a different pedestal altogether, starting off with the visit of President Trump, the unequivocal support that we got from the US against Chinese misadventure, the Quad foreign ministers meeting, the 2+2 meeting, and the exceptional award to Prime Minister Modi, the highest civilian decoration of the Legion of Merit for advancement of India-US relations and to promote peace and prosperity. It has been that way an amazing year in terms of the relationships that we have built with France, with Japan, with Australia. So yes, you are absolutely right when you say that in this year, the message is come what may, come what crisis, we are not slowing down, we are marching ahead.
Having said that, Ambassador Kumar, do you think India's international engagement and international profile, having said that, specifically vis-a-vis the pandemic outreach, the fight to beat pandemic outreach has increased manyfold in 2020?
Yes, I would certainly say that. I think, there has been a bit of misreporting, I must say. For example, it has been systematically pointed out by biased Western media that the number of cases are very high in India. And so if you look at the Western media, they will always say we rank number 3 after US and Brazil. It's the most absurd thing I have heard. We are a country of 1.3 billion people. And if you look at the interviews in the beginning of the year, we were told that our health infrastructure will collapse. Today, our health infrastructure is coping just fine. We are managing to flatten the curve. Yes, there have been very unfortunate 147,000 deaths, but you would think that in a country of the size of 1.3 billion, something that you may have expected. But I would say more important is the enormous improvement in India's soft power, because we were seen as selfless in comparison to other countries which made a killing on selling gloves and selling personal protective equipment.
And look at these numbers. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you here. Commercially, India has supplied at least 560 million tablets of HCQ, 3.13 metric tons of pharmaceutical ingredient of HCQ to at least 82 countries. And also 154, at least 154 million of paracetamol, and API, 1,605 metric tons of API to 96 countries. So those Western media section who point fingers at us and give us those dubious projections, I think they should do their homework.
No, and at a time when we weren't sure how the pandemic was going to play itself out in India. If you see the time at which this was supplied, I mean, it's one thing to supply it today because you know how the pandemic has played out.
Yes.
At the time at which we supplied, we didn't know whether we had enough stocks of and paracetamol.
We're dealing with an unknown situation.
Absolutely. I think that has not gone unnoticed, frankly, despite the Western media propaganda. I think countries know where we are coming from on that issue. And if we can also do the same thing, which I am sure we will replicate it in vaccine diplomacy, and if we can, capitalize on the production of vaccine and make sure in particular we do it for low-income countries. I'm not interested in us supplying to Switzerland and the US. I think they can afford to buy. But if we can do it in Africa, we can do it in other countries, I think that will be a tremendous.
It's a very interesting term, sir, that you've coined or used, perhaps, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, just taking that thought ahead. Vaccine diplomacy, another big takeaway from 2020 foreign policy.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar is making a very good point. The operative word is selfless. I cannot but comment on the fact that there is one country which has caused the problem, another country which is a part of the solution. One country recycles medical supplies and sells it. And another country says, look, our vaccine is meant for mankind. I mean, isn't there a slight difference between the two? And yes, the very fact that India has become the pharmacy of the world, and we have a perfect track record. Medicines which used to be sold for $10,000 were being made available by India for $40 a year. I mean, that is the kind of track record that we have. And at this difficult time, to provide a vaccine for humanity is something that does talk of the caliber of India, the mindset of India, and the disposition. Having said that, one can also not comment on what we have done in terms of our own community, Indians, the diaspora, through Vande Bharat flights to bring back 1.9 million Indians home in such trying circumstances is no mean achievement. And the reason, and Ambassador Mohan Kumar and you were very rightly pointed out that we didn't know what we were up against.
Yes.
And reason why, so far, keep fingers crossed, we are where we are is because of the leadership of the Prime Minister, who took charge of the situation and said, here is the situation, we will deal with it. And the lockdown was absolutely unprecedented, but we did it.
We did it. India's rising new power projections, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, was reflected also in the SCO meet. In a way, we reached to a stage where India said to the world, India assumed that significant role in global affairs. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but then discussion on 2020 foreign policy big takeaways will be incomplete without talking about the SCO template.
I agree with you. I think, the United Nations Security Council, frankly, did not cover itself with glory. They haven't been able to come out with even a statement at the right time on the pandemic. So you had a lot of margin for maneuver and plurilaterals. For me, frankly, Sakal, it's been the year of plurilaterals. It's Quad, whether it is the trilateral between Australia, India, and Japan, whether it has been other concentric circles, you mentioned the SCO. So I just want to maybe conclude this segment just by saying, if you look at any problem the world is facing in terms of climate change, in terms of pandemic, in terms of cybersecurity, the first country that comes to mind is India, because without India, you are not going to be able to solve any of these global problems. In that sense, I would absolutely agree with you. But actually, we find ourselves in a geostrategic sweet spot, and that is something that India should be able to exploit in the days to come.
Are we inching closer to that kind of trust that we have almost won, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash?
Well, yes, we are getting there because, during happy times, everybody smiles, everybody says good things, but, the test comes in difficult times. And when country after country said, look, India, Mr. India, we do not have even paracetamol. I mean, case in point is Britain. India rushed it across. India's pharmaceuticals were like Sanjeevani Booty. I mean, this was something that makes all the difference. Having said that, I think it's a fantastic idea to talk about a pharmaceutical bank, but the cost factor is something that we need to look at. And I think this is one idea that can be taken a close look at. The pros and cons can be weighed. Maybe multiple banks and multiple centers can be set up. Because yes, I agree that the way we are going and the way, not we going, the fear is that more health crises will happen. And it is now that we have faced this situation, it is much better to be prepared so that preemptive action can be taken.
Final word from both of you gentlemen, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and in fact, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, you may start and you can wrap up. Any lessons learned? Any lessons learned so far? And also, India, what according to you has been advantage India in terms of dealing with the situation vis-a-vis compared to the other parts of the world, which are now looking at second phase of stringent lockdowns, and now looking at second phase, and I wouldn't say we are comfortable, but we are much better. We are in much better space.
Yes, I think that goes to the heart of any issue. And there are three things that are very important here. One is leadership. Leadership makes all the difference. Two, you cannot look at precedents. You cannot look at what is the perception. You have to take tough decisions in times of crisis, which under the leadership of the Prime Minister were taken. Lastly, it is the systems. The crisis management systems have to be in place so that things can evolve quickly. And I think now the protocols can be established as to what to do when there are crises like that. And one of the suggestions is a pharmaceutical bank, which I think is a very good suggestion.
So excellent points by my colleague, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. So I can only make some additional points. I completely agree with what he says, by the way. And I think that goes to the heart of the matter, because leadership, the system, I think those are important. For me, three other takeaways, if you like. One is in a situation like this, you get to know who your real friends are.
Absolutely.
Countries operate just like individuals. I mean, I don't want to get into the details, but we know who our real friends are. That's one. Second, I think at the end of the day, in situations like Ladakh, the border, etc., to a great extent, it's been a wake-up call for India, frankly. Because, we had let this relationship flourish without taking into account what is known as due diligence. So I believe personally that there is no going back on some of these things. It's been such a wake-up call that some relationships will, I think, be changed forever. And lastly, I think what you are going to see perhaps is the trust factor, which I said earlier, who your real friends are. I think countries will try to have more relations with countries with whom they can completely trust. This had taken a backseat in the name of globalization and just-in-time manufacturing and so on.
So the pandemic has brought the world together.
Absolutely. So I think
closer.
Yes. I think there will be a paradigm shift, at least in that way.
Very important. Yes, sir.
I said absolutely right. Closer, and it has alerted you, it has opened your eyes to reality, and also taught you a lesson that at the end of the day, self-help is the best help.
Yes, on that note, can I safely say that, just to wrap up this edition of DD Dialogue, that pandemic has brought the world closer, and also at the same time, India dominating that template whenever we talk about the solutions to deal with the pandemic. The biggest takeaway of 2020, India part of those bigger solutions, whether you talk about diplomacy, whether you talk about COVID care, vaccine, or whether you talk about economics on the domestic front as well. Thank you so much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, for joining us on this very, very special edition of DD Dialogue. Here's wishing you once again a very, very happy New Year to both of you, and also to our viewers for tuning into DD Dialogue 2020, New Normal and Big Takeaways. Well, we have left the worst in terms of COVID in 2020. We're looking forward optimistically to a new dawn 2021. Thank you for tuning in. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
विशाल है ना, इसका सब प्रॉपर चलता है। कल उसके बैंक अकाउंट में 15,000 रुपए का फ्रॉड हुआ।